prepare for the board. So anyway, to get back to it, when I was going to become chair of the board by rotation, Lynda was going to become vice chair. We knew that we needed to work together. We needed to link arms, join at the hips, and to work together on climate change, an issue that both of us felt so passionately about. And we started meeting with the various department heads and independent agencies around the county to start talking about what it is that we wanted to accomplish for climate change. How could we prepare as individuals, governments, and the various government entities? And we just had a couple of sessions of, as we call, throwing spaghetti against the wall, with big sheets of paper, and this is before COVID, and to write down this, that, and the other thing for the various topics. And we just had a blast talking about moonshots. What do we want to accomplish that's big and bold, and what is actionable over the next couple of years? And Jane Elias, Energy and Sustainability Director, now with the CAO's office, was so instrumental in helping us organize all of those strands of spaghetti. From Sonoma Clean Power, Regional Climate Protection Authority, Energy and Sustainability, the Water Agency, Permit Sonoma, everyone at the county and the community is absolutely committed to working to address the real needs and try to reverse some of the contributions to greenhouse gas emissions that we are making here in Sonoma County. We know that over the years, we've understood that transportation is our largest contributor of greenhouse gases. And it's pretty hard to change that when we, especially us, living in Oakmont, where we need to get in our cars for the most part, and to access all of our services and doctor's appointments. We do have a bus, and we're grateful for the bus and paratransit. But because of our development patterns that continue to sprawl all over Sonoma County, it's really hard to establish an effective transit service similar to that they have in the Bay Area. And I spent a lot of time in Pittsburgh and Boston understanding and using a very effective transportation system. But we're doing the best we can. And we've come up with many, many different ideas. I think over the COVID definitely helped to put this issue on the back burner. Not that it wasn't needed, but we were absolutely consumed with caretaking for the entire community, both from the economic perspective, recovery perspective for our businesses and individuals, and our health perspective for sure. And you absolutely get that, so you know, and we're still in it. Oh, come on, could just stop and let us move on and be healthy and not have to have Zoom. However, that being said, we do have Zoom. We would never have had these platforms if we hadn't been coping with the pandemic. And what a contribution for the reduction in greenhouse gases. None of us got in our cars tonight I could have walked down the hill to the East Recreation Center. Yes, I'm back in my house up on the top of the hill. It's not quite finished yet, but close. And but few of us could have walked to this meeting, and yet we're able to communicate and exchange these ideas very effectively without contributing greenhouse gases. I think that speaks volumes about the future of work, and we're having these discussions at the county. What does the future of work look like for the county and for the community and our business community? I don't expect us all to be in the position of conducting business exclusively over Zoom or virtually, but I think we've discovered that a good bit of our business can be accomplished. So we've been successful in allocating $10 million from our PG&E settlement funds. That was what Lynda and I decided we were going to ask for. And we were very successful in using that money to fund staff positions for 3 years. We've hired a climate coordinator, Barbara Lee, in the CAO's office, and a climate analyst, Anna Yip, just a stellar student from University of Berkeley. Certainly, I serve as the chair for one more month of the Regional Climate Protection Authority. Lynda and I both serve on SCTA RCPA, and she chairs the ad hoc committee on climate change for RCPA, investigating funding sources for all of the different things that we want to accomplish to reduce our greenhouse gases. We have a long list of projects that will be recommended for board consideration and discussion at our strategic planning meeting. And I hope Lynda is able to sort of take over and talk about some of those projects that we've both been working on. We've, our great staff has developed metrics to evaluate the effectiveness of the programs and all of the different areas for investment. So Lynda, can you take that away?
Yeah, so I'm really excited to be working on a climate funding measure, and we will actually be bringing that back to SCTA RCPA in public for an update at the next meeting. And we are looking at 2024 for this potential ballot measure. And the exciting thing to me is that we're actually planning on sort of launching just community engagement this year. So right around Earth Day, we want to go out and actually envision with all of you what you want the future of Sonoma County, hopefully a carbon-free Sonoma County, hopefully a carbon negative, but, starting with our goal of carbon neutral Sonoma County to actually look like. And, this I think is going to be really fun.
2030, that's our goal.
By 2030, yes.
Carbon neutral by 2030. That's the moonshot.
Yep. We know it's extraordinarily ambitious, but we also feel like that is what the urgency of the times demand, and that we are a county, and that obviously Supervisor Susan Gorin has firsthand experience of what it means to be not just a fire survivor, but a climate survivor. These impacts that we are seeing are absolutely driven by climate change in terms of the intensity and frequency and severity of the wildfire weather that we're experiencing. And unfortunately, it's sort of a triple threat in Sonoma County, right? So we have wildfires that are going to be increasingly severe, moving forward, also flood, also drought. And, that was another thing actually that struck me from COP26 is that we aren't alone. And now we're at a tipping point to where there are more and more people who have actual direct experience of the kinds of climatic disasters that we're going to be seeing more and more of in the future. And that this is one of those cases where, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right? We really need to focus on disaster resilience, but in a way that actually makes us ultimately more sort of, carbon friendly in our approach. Those bike lanes, and this is something that Supervisor Gorin has championed endlessly. Arnold Drive and all of these different opportunities to create bike corridors, both when she was the mayor of Santa Rosa, but also through her work in East County. So anyways, we want to actually work with you, and would love to circle back to this group for a listening session. Maybe Susan would be sort of willing to, attend that and listen to all of you to see what you would like to see. Because basically this first year will be visioning. The second year, next year, we'll be talking about what kinds of funding mechanisms would be acceptable, right? Because let's be honest, folks are kind of tired of parcel taxes, sales taxes also creeping up there. So are there other creative funding mechanisms that we could explore that actually have more of an equitable impact, right? We don't want to create these sort of regressive tax structures that ultimately are more challenging, for our most socioeconomically disadvantaged. So, and then the final year will be the actual implementation plan, but it'll all be based on the community engagement that we're going to be doing and building over the next couple of years. And I also want to just make a quick plug for some of the work that came out of the climate ad hoc, which is the $10 million that was allocated of the PG&E settlement funds. And for the first time ever, our awesome climate staff has actually created sort of a data-driven rubric to help judge the different, basically you have $10 million to spend to try to fight climate change. How do you spend it in the way that gets the biggest bang for the buck and is also most equity driven? And so that was something that Susan really asked for when we were throwing that spaghetti on the wall, was how do we make these decisions? Because the problem feels overwhelming, and there are endless, numbers of decisions. And so what you'll see coming before the board, Susan, do you remember if that's in early February?
It is. Our strategic planning session is early February.
Yeah, and so that will actually be coming back before the board with this kind of new rubric to sort of say, here's how we're going to select which climate projects we move forward with and why we're making those choices. Again, kind of looking at the biggest bang for your buck in terms of greenhouse gas emissions reduction, but also with an equity lens to make sure that we are doing this in a way that is socially just and is equitable. So.
And I would add, as we are going to be hearing and discussing a statement of principle, project statement for the Sonoma Developmental Center in January 25th. Rebecca Hermosillo has been so helpful in researching potential funding for potentially a national energy lab or an annex to an energy lab. We want to create a microgrid system for that campus, similar to what Oakmont has been working on. And kudos to the folks in Oakmont for working on that. PG&E just has their hats off to all of you. I was on the Zoom with them talking about SDC. And so this is exciting to look at building a state-of-the-art community on that campus, the oldest developmental center in California. And what a flip that would be to look at electric vehicle charging stations, bike sharing, car sharing, microgrid programs, which involve solar and different kinds of renewable energy. So not only is Oakmont exploring that, but the Sonoma Developmental Center is an incredible potential before us to exhibit what is possible in Sonoma County.
That's great. Supervisor Hopkins, Supervisor Gorin, thank you so much for your hard work. And this, we're going to open it up to question and answers. But before we do, we lost our connection a little bit. And Lynda, could you tell me again, you are going to propose a ballot measure that has to do with climate. When is that going to hit the voters?
Yeah, so we're shooting for a 2024 ballot initiative. And it is as yet a complete open book. And so that's why we really want to spend this year on a listening tour of, hey, if we're going to get serious about climate change in Sonoma County, which I think we should, because we are ground zero for the impacts here. We really need to put our money where our mouth is and find ways to fund these projects of increasing, pedestrian and bike access, getting more folks out of their cars, strengthening our public transit system. Susan and I have talked endlessly about the need to have, we have the quote unquote spine, right? Which is the 101 corridor. We've got the SMART train. We have a lot of good bus service, but we live out on the ribs, right? In East County and West County. And we need more feeding in from the East and the West. Because, even though I don't live in East County, I love to go hiking out there, and a lot of folks from, Central Santa Rosa love to go to the coast. So, why is it that you have to, I have to get in my car, to drive to the SMART train, and then there's not even enough parking, so we need to figure out some of these wrinkles with respect to feeding East and West County, both the residents as well as visitors going out, right, kind of into our better transit systems along the 101.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. I think Tom is going to moderate the Q&A.
I'll moderate the questions, I guess. Being we're not a huge group, I think we could not have, we could actually do it with raise your hand, either physically or use the little thing on your Zoom screen to wave your hand electronically. And why don't we open up for questions? And don't be shy.
What? You're not speaking?
Okay, I think we got one from Robin. Robin, unmute yourself. Robin, unmute.
I did. Okay. So, Supervisor Hopkins, I was wondering, when you're talking about the ballot initiative, how much, if that's going to be, is it the money attached to that? Is that part of the PG&E settlement?
No.
I can clarify, and thank you for asking that question. So actually, Susan really led the charge on the PG&E settlement funds, because it largely impacted her district and James's district. And one of the things that Susan really wanted to come out of it was $10 million set aside for climate work. Mm-hmm. And so that's coming back to the board for the final approval of the different projects in February. But, and we kind of want to use that, like build on that work and sort of the analysis that's gone into that for a separate thing, which is through SCTA RCPA. Susan appointed me the chair of this climate funding ad hoc committee that's working on developing that ballot initiative, which we're hoping to get on the ballot in 2024. But we don't want to do that without community support. So we're spending the first year with just really listening to the community. Do you think this is a good idea? What do you want to see? What would be that sort of, what would Sonoma County look like in 2030 if you could have all your wishes and dreams for a carbon neutral county that also improves our quality of life? That kind of a conversation.
Let me just say, you may not be familiar with the Sonoma County Transportation Authority and Regional Climate Protection Authority. This body, it has two functions, those two functions, and they include representatives from all of the cities, plus 3 supervisors sit on that body. We help to allocate the funding for transportation projects along with our great staff, but we also work with Tanya Narath, the director of RCPA, to develop a very aggressive mobilization strategy for the Regional Climate Protection Authority. If you go onto the website, you can see the amazing work in there. However, we all want to see more funding for the Regional Climate Protection Authority because it's underfunded and the cities actually have very little funding that they can devote to climate change. So it requires a partnership, a regional partnership, to enable all of the partners, the smaller cities, the larger cities, and the county to be coordinated and to move forward in a collaborative way on strategies that will benefit us all. So thus, Lynda and her ad hoc group have been researching potential funding mechanisms for increased staffing to help collaborate and provide some funding for the implementation of some of the amazing projects on our wish list.
Sue Aiken, you want to go next?
Sure. I just have are there any plans for Highway 12 in terms of improvements, but that would also provide more room for bikes, it's a terrible place to ride a bicycle, or even some sort of, is there any kind of tram service being looked at all? I mean, it seems like that's a corridor that connects 2 cities and a lot of things along the way. And it's potentially jammed with traffic if the minute there's an accident or something.
And we do echo the commonalities between the West County and the East County. Lynda mentioned that, and we have very narrow roads. Both Sonoma Valley and the river area started as a series of summer resorts, as you're all too familiar with. So we have tiny lots and very narrow roads that are barely roads. And Highway 12 at one point was proposed to be a 4-lane highway going from Santa Rosa to Sonoma, Sonoma. And many people along the way, you may regret this, but killed that project. They did not want to see a super highway going through beautiful scenic Valley of the Moon.
Right.
I at times I think, oh, it would be great, especially during evacuations that happen. I did connect with Caltrans regarding their project that they were talking about a number of years ago, and that is widening the shoulders. Even widening the shoulders along Highway 12 would be helpful to us. It would be helpful in evacuations. It would be helpful for bicycles along the way. And they looked at the sheer number of properties that needed right-of-way acquisition, including all of those valuable vineyards. And they said, we do not have the budget, not only to construct and widen the shoulders, but to acquire the right-of-way. So they gave up on the project, I think, in a short-sighted way. And I continue to bring to their attention more fatalities along Highway 12, especially the narrow parts, often involving cyclists and cars. So as a response to that, Lynda's been very aggressive in moving forward in constructing multi-use paths all over the West County. A lot of them are being funded by the Sonoma County Transportation Authority. And I have a feasibility study approved by the board for a multi-use path from Melita Road to Agua Caliente Road, paralleling Sonoma Highway. We have a route. We have a team of engineers and regional parks folks looking at logical connections. and starting to think about how we get the funding to acquire some desperately needed right of way to make that happen. Not a lot of right of way. You know, in Oakmont, we have that Caltrans right away along the frontage of Oakmont, or at least the northern part of Oakmont. And we hope to connect through the infamous El Noca Village, and hopefully that will gain some traction at some point, both as an emergency vehicle route for all of us, but also for a multi-use path. So I wish I could say I was optimistic that it will be constructed during my last 3 years as supervisor. I don't think so, but I'm right in the thick of things of looking at ways that we can fund that path, not only there, but all over Sonoma Valley. The potential is great along the smart tracks. And I'm a recreational cyclist. I know the back roads, but I am on Highway 12 for a small part of that until I get to Dunbar. So thus, I'm absolutely committed to bike lanes on Arnold Drive. Lynda is so tired of hearing about that.
Let me go to Amy Pearl.
So thanks very much, Supervisor Gorin. It's the first I've heard about the multi-use along Highway 12 and throughout the county. I'd love to see that happen in the remainder of your tenure. Is there anything that we can do? I've never heard of it. Can you provide some links to us about it, or and also what can we mobilize to support that?
Great questions. We've actually been working through Hugh Helm with the Oakmont Village Association to enable easy connections along the northern part of Highway 12 to access at the main intersection of Oakmont Drive and Highway 12. And then the bike lane will change size at that red light. We do have the right of way across the frontage of the Crush Sugarloaf facility. And now we're negotiating with Novavine and the property owners along there. Obviously, Los Gulicos is easy. Even Steve Ledson has seen the advantage of having a multi-use path going there. So it's property by property by property. If you know any of those property owners or business owners or wineries, please let them know that you support their work with regional parks to donate or at least figure out how we connect through their property. It will be incredible for all of us, but certainly a business advantage to them as well.
Could you provide us a list of what those businesses are?
I absolutely will, but you can right off the top, we have the agreement from the Custom Crush facility. If you know anybody at Novavine, let them know that you're interested in connecting with them. Los Gulicos is easy. Ledson has agreed. St. Francis, if you belong to the wine club, connect with St. Francis to look at and support some right-of-way acquisition across their frontage. And Kunde Winery, if any of you purchase wine there, just tell them you want to see a multi-use path.
Great.
Okay.
Chris?
Lynda or Susan, just wanted to ask about charging stations for electric vehicles. How about having wineries pick up the tab for installing them at their wine tasting areas? Maybe they could help us out. Also, I'd like to see more of a public effort to get apartment complexes outfitted with charging stations. I think there's people who maybe wouldn't do it on their own for maybe financial reasons. I don't know how much they cost to install, but any thought about like public charging stations?
Lynda, why don't you talk about Sonoma Clean Power's effort? They were one of the first to really talk about electrification of the vehicle fleet as a great mechanism to reduce GHG.
Thanks, Susan. So one thing that we worked on through Sonoma Clean Power was leveraging funding from the state through what's known as the Cali VIP program. And it was actually geared specifically for rural communities. So even in just the 5 years that I've been in office, we've actually gone up by orders of magnitude in the number of charging stations in Sonoma County. There's still a lot of work to be done. You know, we can't just sort of pat ourselves on the back and say, you know, done. But we have improved in a lot of the small towns out in West County, and I know in East County as well. And actually, one of the challenges has always been making that connection with business owners. Like, we were literally calling business owners individually that we knew had parking lots that were open 24/7, and the state had certain guidelines, right? Like, you couldn't, you know, sort of close it to the public. And so some people close up their parking lots just for security purposes overnight. So we had to work through some of that. And a lot of the land, you know, out in West County along the coast was owned by state parks. So working through different government bureaucracies. But we, you know, we sort of just went through that process, and those projects are still, some of them are still being installed. And we're constantly looking for new funding sources from the state. But that could certainly also be part of a future funding measure. Oh, and on the multifamily, that's a great question. We actually are working specifically on that issue at Sonoma Clean Power right now, because we're trying to really internalize equity work. And we realized that, hey, you know, we did these great programs where we gave sort of discounts to EVs, right? And charging stations, but we weren't really focusing as much on tenants, you know, and on sort of lower income Sonoma County residents. And so we're kind of retooling a lot of our incentive programs to focus on multifamily units and on socioeconomically disadvantaged community members. One example is that we've actually recently implemented an e-bike program. So trying to get people out of their cars and sort of taking, you know, lower income folks and actually giving them e-bikes. And so that's also, I think, a really great alternative for folks who might not quite be able to make the commute to work on their own, but if they had a little bit of, you know, electrical assistance with their bike, then it makes it a little bit easier for them to make that commitment to commuting by bike. So
Regional Climate Protection Authority also has been instrumental in trying to convince business owners and especially cities to look for locations for the electric vehicle charging station. It's not always easy because there is an assumption that at some point a business owner will have to have some responsibility for that charging station, and there may be maintenance involved in successive years. I remember a few years ago, some of the board members now have electric vehicles, and so we asked for a charging station by our parking spaces. We could not get a charging station because that would be a gift of public funds to an elected official. So we do have them on the county campus, but not in front of our parking spaces. I know, Lynda, don't you have an electric car? And there are other board members who do as well.
Great. Let me call on, I have you down as unknown host.
Hi, it's Lynda Membregno, and I'm on my iPad, so it doesn't show my name.
Welcome.
Thanks. You know, over 50 years ago, my dad would commute from the Bay Area, from the peninsula up to Healdsburg, where he would and get involved in the city council meetings, because he was one of the first people involved in developing geothermal power, and was you know, one of the first guys up there drilling wells and sending electricity from the geysers into the, you know, the surrounding areas. My question is, where does Sonoma, and I'm new to Sonoma County, I just moved here 6 months ago. Where does Sonoma County get its power? Is it hydroelectric? Is it solar? Is it wind? Is it geothermal? Is it coal? Is it gas? Where do we get our power? And how are we going to, you know, get rid of the carbon sources?
Go for it, Lynda.
that's a great question. So the geysers is the largest geothermal power plant in the United States, and it produces enough power to power all of the residents from basically the Golden Gate Bridge to the Oregon border. So there's kind of two answers to your question, which is like, what is the sort of literal power that we're receiving, you know, sort of through the wires, and then what's the power that we're paying for? Because energy markets are a little bit sort of bifurcated, right, with respect to where the power is generated and where it's ultimately used and sort of who's paying for it. So if you look at Sonoma Clean Power on the website, we actually have a publicly available portfolio of all of the different power sources that we purchase from. And the sort of automatically enrolled program is not 100% renewable, but you can self-select into the Evergreen program, which is what my family does. And it's not actually a huge premium. I don't know, it's like $10 or $20 a month, which we feel is worth it to have 100% renewable energy. And so we're constantly trying to get, in particular, municipal and commercial customers switch over to evergreen. So if you know any businesses, this is, I think, a good branding opportunity to be able to say they're 100% renewable and sourcing locally through Sonoma Clean Power. But yeah, I would encourage you to go ahead and look at the portfolio because it's actually pretty complicated. And we always get into really sort of nerdy conversations about, is hydroelectric really actually renewable? What about sort of the greenhouse gas emissions that are emitted when a dam goes in, right? And sort of all of the methane that's released when an area is inundated. So it's a kind of complex but interesting subject, and all the information is available on the Sonoma Clean Power website.
And I use the incentives offered by Sonoma Clean Power and PG&E to put solar panels and battery backup system in my rebuild house. So I am a sort of an individual microgrid, and I feel great if, in fact, we're going to have a power shutdown that hopefully it's not for extended period of time, but I'm able to be my own source of power, except for not in December. Oh man, it's been cloudy and miserable. I haven't been generating very much. And I'm not encouraging you to flush your toilets a lot, but when you do flush your toilet, it goes to the center or the sub-regional treatment plant, and from there the treated wastewater is piped up to the geysers to recharge the dwindling supply of the geothermal. So Lynda, thank your father very much for his work on the geysers up there. And over the years, the amount of energy and steam produced has been dwindling. So our wastewater has regenerated those fields. Interestingly, I've just learned that the Sonoma Developmental Center, a couple hundred feet down, has the potential for some geothermal activity. So in some of the mountain areas, we may be looking at small scale geothermal production.
Great. We'll look for other questions. Now I will note in the chat, as some of you might have noticed, this could be a commercial, but the piece was that if they put in an electric charging station at a winery, that person is more likely to go there. So that could be good news for our wineries, right? Maybe we even promote that. Other questions we have from the floor? Wally.
What is the size of the county fleet of vehicles? And do you have a schedule for retiring them to electric vehicles?
We are so proud that Sonoma County has been given kudos nationwide for its green fleet over the years. Every chance we get, we electrify our vehicle fleet, and it's either hybrid vehicles or electric vehicles. We have electric buses, and we've just been doing some great work. Lynda, do you have any more specifics than that?
No, I don't. I think that one thing though, we were really one of the early leaders. And I think that it was even before I joined the board, and I know, Susan, it was something that you advocated for, that we received a National Association of Counties award for having sort of one of the greenest fleets in the nation. But I also think that, now batteries are at a place where they weren't when we first got it. So I actually would love to sort of take a fresh look at the fleet. I know we've always been good, but let's see if we can push this further, because now we have batteries that have extended ranges that maybe that would be, maybe we can start even replacing more vehicles. And maybe, Susan, that's something that you and I can look at as part of the climate work.
I know, Lynda, you and I have had some humorous conversations about electrifying the fleet of sheriff's vehicles. I'd love to see them with electric vehicles. And actually, they do have some electric vehicles, but usually not the patrol vehicles out there. They like the heavy duty Ram Chargers.
So,
They
and
can
you want to
change.
go with your question next?
Is that me, Tom?
Yeah.
Sure. Supervisor Gorin mentioned one of my all-time really favorite companies, PG&E. Like the supervisor, we have solar on our roof and a battery, but I note with interest that PG&E is currently working to significantly reduce the payment for the power that we supply to the grid, which is going to be a serious disincentive for several of our neighbors to install solar on their rooftops. Does the county have anything to say about that? Can we weigh in any way?
There's a
Well, I
very
know
active
Sonoma
group.
County Power has been very active constantly in lobbying the California Public Utilities Commission. So Lynda, what's the position of Sonoma Clean Power?
Yeah, so this actually came up at our last board meeting, which was just, or I guess last week. And members of the public brought it up in public comment. And so it wasn't agendized, so we couldn't take action, but we did sort of provide staff direction to come back. And this is something that we would like to fight. I think it's wholly unacceptable. I mean, you know, this is, and quite frankly, we need more people with solar and battery backups, not less, because PG&E can't keep the damn lights on. I mean, I was out without power for 24 hours just over the weekend because one power pole was taken out, which shut down power for 12,000 West County residents from here almost to the Mendocino border. There is no redundancy, there is no resilience or hardening of infrastructure. And so the fact that it's sort of that fragile, I think really shows that we need to have more little mini microgrids like Supervisor Gorin has on her house. And the fact that PG&E is going after this, I mean, I think they're just desperate, honestly, at this point. You know, they were trying to jack up rates by like 20%.
Yes.
You know, I just feel like they're scrabbling for money because quite frankly, for decades, they failed to make the investments that they needed to in infrastructure, and they kept their, you know, sort of profits healthy at the expense of all of us. And so now they're trying to figure like, oh, now they're going to make us fix some things maybe, and how are we going to pay for it, you know?
Full disclosure, I'm part of the PG&E lawsuit stemming from the 2017 fires, and no, I have not received a settlement yet. I suspect all the attorneys and trustees will siphon it off the top, so I'll get pennies on the dollar. But, and so I am not a fan of PG&E. However, we have excellent folks working locally, really recognizing how fragile we are in Oakmont and strengthening the grid, both at the Rincon Valley substation and the Dunbar substation. I hope that has limited the power shutdowns for us, and I'd like to see more of that. I'd like to have the CPUC mandate PG&E bury more and more of their lines. They can't bury all of them, but they need to really invest significantly in burying those lines to avoid fires in the future.
Sue and then Amy. Sue first.
Yeah, this is a good opportunity to just put in a plug to watch for educational forums on the microgrid that is underway in terms of a future microgrid for Oakmont itself. It's a very complicated process, and today there was supposed to have been a second educational forum when there was one just before Christmas, I guess it was. But it's great. We'll do a second one in March. So just watch for information about that in the Oakmont News. And it's, like I said, it's long and complicated, but the process is actually officially underway with some of the parties that have to be involved. So it's much, much bigger than just Oakmont. PG&E is involved, as well as their organizations. So I couldn't begin to explain that to you, but Ken Smith here in Oakmont is taking charge of that. So,
and again, kudos to all of the folks who've really done a lot of advanced work and to making this project very, very viable. If any of you are considering the installation of solar panels and battery backup, now's the time. The cost of batteries is getting progressively lower, and there may continue to be some incentives from the state and federal government for the installation of solar panels. I know that many of my neighbors have installed solar panels and battery backup because it was less expensive than moving, which is what they were contemplating as a reaction to the power shutdowns. So they feel much better, much safer, especially if they're on a medical alert and medical equipment. But I have heard from many people, they've been on the waiting list for a very long time for the installation of solar panels and battery backup. So be patient, but maybe that's one of the things that Oakmont can work on, is have a selection of folks from the solar panel industry come in and say, you know, here's my backup, here's what you need to do. It's not easy to calculate and navigate through that. And maybe there are volunteers in Oakmont to help.
Well, we actually, about 2 years ago, pre-COVID, did have a solar vendor fair here. And that got the ball rolling, and it's sort of self-perpetuating. But on the OVA website, there is a list of vendors. They can never recommend vendors, but there are those that have been working here and working towards being compliant. One issue that surfaced a little bit is that there may be you have to be sure the vendors are willing to be in compliance with our architectural committee and not just go around that. So it's really important to make certain from the beginning that you're in compliance. And that's up to you as the homeowner to make sure about that. But so we have been, there was a group that was very, for about 2 hours, for 2 hours, no, for 2 years, actually working on encouraging and inviting in. We had a forum in the Burger that was filled to the brim with people interested in solar. So we know that people are here that do want to have solar.
Great. So let me go to Amy, and then what I'd like to do is if some of you who have been very shy tonight have not raised your hand, I'll give priority to any first timers as far as one or two of the last questions. Amy, did you want to go?
Well, I actually put my comments in the chat box, although I don't know the supervisors saw it. But first of all, I'm so appreciative of how strong both of you are about PG&E and accountability. It's great to hear that from you. And this notion about reducing the incentives for solar panels, and instead there was some argument that they're trying to increase incentives for battery backup. It seems like a completely false choice. You know, and we have this in the state. I assume that the incentives are coming from the state, and the state is flush with money. And I mean, and yes, of course, there's all these competing priorities, but it just seems like a completely false choice. And yes, we should be supporting people becoming their own microgrid. And I would like to see Wild Oak included in the Oakmont plan. So I will try to get this too.
Yeah, there may be, I'm not sure. Yeah.
So
And I encourage you to outreach to our state and federal representatives, and with that advocacy, absolutely. The CPUC and our legislators need to hear from us about our connections and incentives for installing solar panels and battery backup, as well as the fair charges levied by the CPUC.
great. Other questions? Jeff?
Hi, what kind of funding options are available to the county to create some of these programs, and also to incentivize residents to use less carbon? I mean, like, for instance, carbon tax, things like that can be reinvested in these programs.
Lynda, you've been investigating some financing mechanisms, and you and I had some creative ideas about the airport, and so let her roll.
I'll start actually with that airport idea that we had sort of brainstormed, which is, is there an ability to have some kind of a carbon tax, on the airport, which we own and operate as part of county government. We also have, thought about what about some kind of an Amazon Prime tax, which would, apply to all of the deliveries that are adding, truck trips to our road and greenhouse gas emissions into our county, and also sometimes undermining local business, right? So that could also have sort of a side benefit of, why don't you actually go to the local bookstore instead of, pressing that little button on Amazon Prime and having it delivered to your doorstep a couple of days later. So I can say that we're examining a number of creative funding solutions as part of this climate funding ad hoc, although we won't really get serious about that until next year when we start to have community conversations about it. We are limited in terms of what we have the actual power to do in local government. City of Santa Rosa as a charter city has slightly more sort of flexibility and authority. Our CPA, SCTA really doesn't have much at all. The county has some things that it could do in unincorporated, but actually one of the things we're leaning towards is what about creating, like basically drafting a ballot initiative and then seeing if voters are willing to actually gather signatures to put it on the ballot. Because actually if there's a voter initiative, there would be significantly more legal authority to do things that government can't just kind of do on its own. Another idea is actually looking at the state and saying, hey, we have this idea. We'd like to be a pilot project for this new kind of local government authority and funding opportunity. So we are willing to try to push the envelope and try to come up with creative solutions. But yes, something like a carbon tax or a luxury tax, there are different kind of ways that we can slice this, but we would like to get at, how do you incentivize the right behavior and disincentivize the wrong behavior? And we'd love to hear your idea. No idea is too crazy or out there, right? we want to brainstorm and we want to come up with new solutions that could be potentially replicable in other jurisdictions.
Yeah, well, every time there's a discussion about the environment, it all ends up coming down to money, to funding, and so that's a really big issue. I mean, let's face it, if gas was $12 a gallon right now, most of the cars on the road would already be electric. So it's really a question of how you use the tax code and funding to steer the community in the right direction.
Great. Good. Terry?
Oh, excuse me.
Hi, I'm really enjoying this discussion, and it's great to hear that we have such progressive county supervisors. And I love the ideas about trying to get bike paths somewhere, either on Highway 12, that's not my dog, or it's the lady who's standing in a Hindu temple. Okay. Anyway, another idea. I just moved here in August from Davis, and I have to admit I was extremely spoiled. I had a Trader Joe's only 1 mile from my house, and everything I could possibly need within a 2-mile radius. I'm absolutely shocked at how far one has to drive to get to a grocery store other than a Safeway store from Oakmont. And I think that I was a land use, transportation, air quality planner for 30 years, also worked for Caltrans, and I helped create a movement called Smart Growth. And part of Smart Growth is locating services close to where people live so that they don't have to drive so far to get to what they need. And I don't know why there are no grocery stores around here other than Safeway. And even that is to me, an exorbitant distance. I put more miles on my car since moving here in August than I did all last year. So are there any ideas or proposals for getting like a Trader Joe's in this neck of the woods? We need grocery stores closer to Oakmont other than Safeway.
Well, Terry, you moved from Nirvana when you're talking about services and transportation. And I have to be a bit of a doom and gloom here, because had we had a proposal to approve Oakmont now, it never would have been approved.
I'm glad to hear that, because it's an exurban development. Yes.
And that's why the city and the county are putting so much emphasis into developing the downtown Santa Rosa, really looking at intensifying development, grocery stores, services, the smart train, moving the county center downtown so our employees would use transit to get there. We can use the bicycle to get there as well. You're right. I tend to frequent the Oakmont market as much as I possibly can.
I can't find anything to buy in that market. I'm sorry.
Oh, well, I would, I just think that my mother-in-law walks there, and that's the only market really that she shops at, unless she has someone to help her shop. And I get what you're saying, but so think about your shopping trips and limiting the frequency of shopping trips.
Oh, I do. I only go every two. I only go on major shopping trips now every two weeks.
I'll see there.
I pray for no PG&E power outages because my freezer is full. But I think the Recon Valley has developed quite a bit, and possibly could support that. The 2 Trader Joe's in town are heavily impacted, over impacted.
Yeah.
And I would like to
Well,
have
you're
one
new,
closer.
but I will amuse you that Trader Joe's proposed to put a store in where the Prickett's site used to be, and Oliver's, our lovely Oliver's, threatened to sue them.
I had
They
a
did not
feeling.
Trader Joe's there.
I had
So-
a feeling, right, because Oliver sees them as competition. But
Yeah.
in Davis, we had 2 Nuggets, Trader Joe's, and a co-op, and they all did fine.
Yeah, I'm
Because
gonna,
it's different markets,
Right.
so.
Yeah.
I'm gonna, I will lament how, I love Oakmont, but I will say it is rather spread out. When we lived in Stockton before we moved here, I could walk to 20 restaurants, but we'll leave that on the side. That wasn't that good. That
Well,
wasn't-
I just would like to put a plug in for more electric shuttles out of Oakmont. Since I don't believe in putting supermarkets out here in the middle of the woods. No offense to you, Terry, but what's done is done. This place we're living in was built in the 60s, and we would never do that now. But if we had more all-electric shuttles heading into Safeway, that might help. But go ahead.
Okay, I'm gonna move it along. We have 2 more questions, 2 more hands up. And then I'm gonna turn it back to Ed in a second, and we'll tie up the meeting. Louise, let me go to you first because you haven't had a question.
Okay, all righty. I'm also from Davis by virtue of Santa Cruz. But I also want to support what was said about either some kind of transportation into town beyond what we have. I did talk to the bus driver, and I believe I'm not sure how often those buses go, but it didn't sound like it was very often. So
Pretty
electric shuttles or any other thing, because this is, an adult community, and there's going to be a group of people who can't drive as they age. So whatever can be done to make it easier for them to get into town to a variety of venues would be, I think, good in terms of long-term planning.
Thanks,
I
Louise.
think that's right on, Louise. And there's 5,000 of us out here. And
Yes.
I think it's a constituency that, if we could have cooperation from the city or county to get more of us off of the roads and out of our cars, I would be for that.
Supervisor Gorin, you want to make any comment on that?
No, I've been around a while. I remember when the city threatened to shut down the bus system from Oakmont, and a group of folks in Oakmont negotiated with the city to keep the bus and make a contribution from the OVA dues to keep the buses operating from Oakmont. And it really speaks to, and those 2 from Davis really know this, critical mass. So when you have higher density, it's more efficient to provide transportation services. And what I've discovered is, Rebecca's from Sonoma Valley. You would think, and people complain that we don't have frequent enough service up and down the valley. And shockingly, there are not many people from Sonoma Valley that travel to Santa Rosa as a hub. It's not like people traveling to San Francisco as a hub, as a business center. People in Sonoma Valley may go to Napa, they may go to Petaluma, some of them go to Santa Rosa. So it's not easy to do transportation planning. But in Sonoma Valley, we have a free circulator bus circulating between Temelec and the Springs and the city of Sonoma. And eventually, when we develop SDC, it will be a circulator bus going there. Sebastopol has a free circulator bus. Windsor, almost all of our cities do. And they're not frequented by huge numbers, but the people who use them love to have free buses. So that should be our goal. And if we had a bus, would you use it? You have to look into yourselves.
Great, thank you.
I'd just like to add that I think there are a lot of buses in Oakmont, because my house that I bought in the orchard is right on Pythian, and believe me, I hear them and see them as they go by. And there are City of Santa Rosa buses, there are County of Sonoma buses, there are the smaller transit vans. I was shocked at how much transit service there is in this low density community. And I don't really see too many Oakmont residents using the buses that are available. So,
Right.
yeah.
But some of our service workers
that's-
do, some of our caregivers do use the bus. So thank you, Terry.
So before I call on Ed, I do want to comment, then I'll pass it to Ed for the last question, and then also to tie up the meeting as the MC. I know that Dems, the Stand for Justice, and the progressives here have been talking about, we realize we're coming in to an election year, and we intend to be really active. And so tell your neighbors and tell everybody, if you like the postcard, text, canvas, donate money. We will be providing opportunities and some suggestions on some of the key races. There will be some in the county, there will be some at the state, and there'll be a lot at the national level. The other thing the clubs might think about, I know we were talking about in the Dem board today, which was attended by that dog. That dog did attend the Dem board meeting, I should say. I think it was the same dog, but we were talking about in our March meeting, having a postcard party to kind of kick off postcarding here at Oakmont in a formal way. Be interesting. Maybe we could have a bus party where we do something to promote the buses coming out of Oakmont. That might be interesting. So on that note, something to think about. Let me turn it over to Ed to ask the question and tie it up.
And let me just say, Tom, if you decide to have a bus party, let me know. I'll jump on the bus with you. We can have this great conversation going to and from Santa Rosa. And we could have little lectures along the way. That would be sort of fun. The county races to watch are the sheriff's race. More people are jumping into the race. There's probably 4 or 5 candidates now. The district attorney so far is uncontested. She's a pretty wonderful candidate. I think the assessor on the register of voters so far is uncontested. Diva Marie Proto is amazing. We have 2 of our colleagues, the 2 men now on the board, David Rabbit and James Gore, are running for re-election this year. So we have some supervisorial races, and you all should know, if you haven't heard, this is my last term as supervisor. And I will not be running for re-election.
Well, Susan, you've had a long record of service
We really
to
appreciate
both the city and the county.
everything.
I know we also have been reassigned to a different assembly district. So Jim Wood, who actually is health committee, will be hearing AB 1400 tomorrow, which hopefully he will follow through on his commitment and vote to approve it. But we will be in a different assembly district, and there will be multiple candidates for that race as well. So Ed, all yours.
Well, and I'll add on to that we have been, the progressives and the Dems have been talking about sponsoring some candidate forums later in the spring. We'll have to work more on that. And certainly the sheriff's race is one that we were involved in last time on the losing side. And we may well want to get involved in that one again. My question may be too complicated to open at this late date. It's related to density. Obviously, people locate stores where there's enough customers to make the store economically viable, which is Oliver's being an employee-owned store is dear to our progressive hearts, but I'm sorry they oppose Trader Joe's. But we have 2 communities that may go in right here along Highway 12. El Noca to our northwest and the SDC to our southeast. And both of them are going to be of some size and have some significant impact on the traffic and services along Highway 12. So I was going to ask you both to give a comment on that before we wrap up the meeting, because we've heard a lot about it from people here in Oakmont.
Well, let me just say regarding El Noca Village, and I'm still not sure it's going to move forward. We're not sure what Mr. Gallagher is planning right now. When I was mayor of Santa Rosa, they came to me and they were proposing an all-age community and monolithic ridiculous looking structures. And I said, you have to listen to Oakmont. You have to work with Oakmont. And they poo-pooed me, they dismissed me. But pretty soon they came to Oakmont and they said, okay, let's figure out how we can work together. And then the fires really happened, and I'm not sure what's going to happen with Anoka Village. It rests with the city, and people think that the Board of Supervisors has a role in that. We do not. But Chris Corsi and I did write a joint letter to the Planning Commission of the city and the City Council saying, if you approve it, we want 2 emergency vehicle access points through Anoka Village. One at the end of Stonebridge connecting to Channel Drive, and one an extension of the MultiUse Path through Anoka to Melita. And so we're aware of the need for evacuation routes, multiple evacuation routes, especially for Oakmont. I was with you when I evacuated during the glass fire, and it took me an hour and a half to get out of Oakmont. Now I did delay just a little bit, taking photos of everything in my house, packing up all kinds of stuff. I was not losing more stuff in another house fire. So I was a little bit late, but I recognized that by the time I got out there, the flames were already coming into Oakmont. So time is of the essence. And I was really gratified that the first responders were there knocking on doors, and we lost no one in Oakmont, even though we lost some homes in Oakmont. The development of the SDC is the residents around there are very nervous about fire and evacuation because they've been in the middle of gridlock for some of those evacuations. And we know that the 2017 fires came up to the eastern edge of SDC. So it's one of the discussion points that the supervisors will be having in January 25th. I personally am very supportive of housing, services, employment, education, workforce development on the site. And I'm trying to figure out how we can create that to happen in the scale that is supported by the community and is not a danger to the residents, future residents on the site or around the site. Maybe the impossible dream, but we'll see where I go with that.
Okay.
In terms of how the rest of the board views that development, I really do think that we will be looking to Susan's lead. That's one of the things that comes along with her tremendous, commitment to public service, and that she has been fighting these fights and trying to do, right by the community for so long. And so, when it comes to that, when it comes to traffic issues, I think we will really look to her lead and try to support her work in that community. One of the things I love working about with Susan is that we have the same issues out in West County. So I get it, and she just says, oh, and I'm like, oh, I know what you mean. The evacuation routes, the sort of concerns about development in a fire prone area. We have all of those same issues. And so, I really look forward to hearing from her constituents and to hearing from Susan directly with respect to the directions that this project should take.
Okay, well, I want to really thank Supervisor Hopkins and Supervisor Gorin for being with us tonight after a long and taxing day. Really appreciate it. Also want to thank, on behalf of the Progressives, Supervisor Gorin for all her great work over the years. We've worked with her on a number of issues. She's come and talked with us, and she's been fabulous. So personally speaking, sorry to lose you. Speaking from your interest, I'm sure you deserve a rest.
You will not lose me. I rebuilt my. I'm going to be with you all the way. I'll be walking down the hill to get to your progressive meeting.
Good. We look forward to that again, Susan. Thank you.
Everybody.
Yes, and if it turns out that on that work you would like to have a listening session in Oakmont, I'm sure we can get together with the Dems and the Stand for Justice and work on sponsoring something like that, Supervisor Hopkins. So please keep us in mind for that. Having said that, I think I'll say thank you all for coming. It's been engaging and interesting as always. And hopefully we'll see you in person in February. But if not, we'll see you in February. So thanks all.
Bye.
All right, take care.
Good night.